there's so much knowledge from the traditional healers of understanding what is mental illness, how to treat it with plants, but all of that knowledge still needs to be recorded. Up till today, it hasn't been recorded.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about plant medicines and psychedelics, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and today we have a very special guest calling in from South Africa, Francois Sobiecki. Francois, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me on the show, and really happy to be on Webdelics. So a little bit about myself. I am a South African ethnobotanist, a medicinal plant researcher. I've been researching African medicinal plants and psychoactive plants for over 20 years now. Started in 1999. I had an innate curiosity to learn about herbalism. I wanted to become a herbalist after school, but unfortunately there wasn't anything in the country at the time in South Africa being offered. So I just went out there in my little VW Beetle and started doing my own field work, and started finding amazing findings of psychoactive plants. But I'll tell you more about why that was important, because there was a huge gap in the research in Africa. So my research was on the cusp of the new, of a dormant, a field that lay dormant for a long time in Africa.
You have done a lot. And I've got to say, Matt, when you talked about how long you've been studying these plants, I looked at you and I was thinking, geez, I need to switch careers. Brother, you look good. I was like, wow, whatever he's taken with these plants, they're keeping you very, very youthful. I've got to admit,
Thanks.
I'm jealous. Jean-Francois, with all of that said, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott.
Now, thank you. The theme of the day is, as you've hinted at, Jean-Francois, the secret history of African psychedelics. By way of background, there is a very well-known book called Plants of the Gods by Hoffman and Schultes. And in this book, it makes a significant statement about African psychedelics, specifically that Africa has a curious lack of psychoactive plants that we now would call psychedelics. And it's my understanding, after our pre-show conversation, Jean-Francois, that you were skeptical when you read this and wanted to find out if that was really true. Why exactly were you so skeptical when you read that?
Scott, basically, having researched the American and South American plants like ayahuasca and San Pedro and peyote, I just asked myself the question: are the sangomas and the traditional healers here in Africa using similar plants to aid their trance induction? And what made me curious is that we have such rich traditions here and such rich plant use that it made no sense to me that there wouldn't be those plants being used. I just thought that we're in the cradle of humankind in Southern Africa. What's happened to these plants? Why weren't they not recorded? Or I just had an intuition that this was a rich plant use, but that's, for some reason, it was overlooked. So that spurred me on to go and do the research and find out for myself and ask the question, driven by curiosity, to find out if this was true and what I could find.
I love kind of suspenseful stories like this, right? It's almost like you saw Pandora's box and you were told that there was nothing inside, but you were determined to find out whether that was true. And so I'm sitting here kind of on the edge of my seats trying to figure out, okay, what is he going to say as he began this exploration? Now, you hinted a little bit earlier about this exploration process, but talk to us a little bit about how you really began the follow-up then, because if I wouldn't have even known where to start. I couldn't even imagine where to start.
I mean, I didn't have a formal guidance by a supervisor of how to do this. I just thought I'm going to find the sangomas in their shops, because they have umuti shops. They call them umuti shops, the medicine shops in Johannesburg. So I actually set off initially into the local, the nearest location. So the locations were the settlements for African people during the apartheid regime, which was set up into neighborhoods, in the apartheid regime. So I basically I went into these areas and then asked people where I could find traditional healers, and I interviewed their traditional healers and asked them, were they using plants for these purposes? And I started to just document these interviews and found amazing things, found very amazing things.
Well, in light of the fact, though, that South Africa has such a notorious history of racial tensions, and you are a white man, were there any resistances that you encountered along the way to sharing this information?
Scott, there were some traditional healers that were not open to sharing the knowledge with me, but a lot of the healers were very curious as to why I was doing this research, and along the way I met my my future teacher, and she basically encouraged me to do this research, and she slowly but surely became a friend and mentor along the way, and that basically I went and interviewed about 30 or 40 traditional healers from their shops. Some were interested, some weren't. A lot of them were saying that it was very secretive knowledge. But having met my mentor, she basically she helped me understand the role of the traditional medicines in African traditional medicine.
Talk to me a little bit then about what you learned, both about the culture of the medicine, but also about the medicines themselves.
Yes. So, Scott, the driving force in me, my passion was to understand what is the role of psychoactive or psychedelic plants in African traditional medicine. The literature was very, very scant on that. Like we mentioned, the Plants of the Gods said there's a big gap in Africa. They gave reasons owing to hunter-gatherer societies having having a great belief and reverence for plants with psychoactive properties, where they said in the New World that was happening, but in the Old World, pastoralists, moving away from hunter-gathering, lost the reverence for these plants and lost their they didn't use the plants for vision quests like in Native American traditions or First Nations traditions. And so this plant use became less respected. But this is definitely not what I found after many years of research in Southern Africa. So my questions were all about plants plants being used for dreaming. Was that important? Which I found it's indispensable in African traditional medicine. The lay people and the diviners, they often use plants to palaza with, which means to vomit with. So it's very similar to Vimana therapy from Ayurveda in India, where you drink a liquid made from plants, and then you clean your body by vomiting with the medicine. But what happens is you clear the phlegm from the chest, the kapha, they call it in Ayurvedic medicine. You clear it from your body, and that opens up the subtle channels of intuition and sensitivity in the mind, which is what I discovered is the cross-cultural technology of using the plants, both in India and in Southern Africa. So African people often drink the decoctions and the infusions made of certain plants called Ubulau. So that's the word for the collective word for the preparation form of the medicine. And then they would clean yourself in the morning, vomit and clean, and talk to your ancestors, talk to God or pray to God. And then what would happen is that some of the medicine would stay in your system, and that medicine would potentiate your sensitivity and your intuition. And that leads to dreams. So the Ubulau is a doorway to dreaming in the African traditional medicine system. And that is key because in African traditional medicine, the dreams are the domain of the ancestors, of the ancestral spirits. So when you are able to use a tool that allows you to dream, you're able to connect with your ancestors. And it's very prolific. It's a very big tradition here.
So you describe in a way something that also sounds like another substance that those who listen to or watch this show are probably more familiar with, ayahuasca, in that you drink this substance and then you purge and then you have these visions. Although you're describing an experience that sounds a little bit more extended than that. But am I mishearing what you're saying? How is it different than the ayahuasca experience? And talk to us a little bit more about what these dreams are like. I mean, are they just like regular dreams that I might have when I go to bed? If so, like, why would I need a psychoactive plant to help me?
No, that's a great question, Scott. So there is quite a big difference between the ayahuasca and the Ubulau. Ayahuasca often just makes you vomit and makes you purge, whether you like it or not. But the Ubulau is basically a preparation of 5 liters of water, wherein you put the roots of specific plants, the Ubulau species, which you pound and you put it into the water, and then that infusion you drink. But the difference with Ubulau is you manually stimulate yourself to clean yourself. So you put your fingers into your mouth to the back of the throat, or some people use a feather just to tickle the back of the throat so that you literally self-induce vomiting. So you clean yourself. And my teacher explained that cleanliness is close to godliness. So when you keep your body clean from phlegm using Ubulau, it kind of opens the channel to the dreams from the ancestors. And of course, you're connecting with the spirit of the plant and the plants that you're using. So ayahuasca makes you purge, where with Ubulau, you make yourself purge with the medicine. You do it yourself.
Fascinating. Why has this not been studied before? It's just, it confounds my very limited imagination that something that has this sort of property and that has been historically used throughout an entire population would somehow just, people wouldn't be aware of it and say, right, that there's this lack of this sort of substance in an entire continent where people are using it every day, it sounds like. What was going on with that?
Yeah, so while I was doing the research over the years, I was learning about the different forms of psychoactive plants. So I think we should come back to this, that there are 2 major categories in African traditional medicine of the psychoactive plants: the strong-acting visionary plants, the psychedelic plants, like Buffon, Disticha, or Noto. And then you get the subtle-acting Ubulau plants, which you can drink for days on end. Basically, I used Ubulau for 2 weeks in my initiation, which slowly but surely opened up my intuition. And you use it every day in the morning before eating food. You use the medicine. But all this plant use was basically shelved for decades in South Africa, because one day I realized why this was. And why this was is there was a piece of information in an article that described how researchers in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, or even in the 60s in Southern Africa were focused on food plants and not magic and customs and ritual. So basically, in a nutshell, the predominantly white led academia from the apartheid regime were not interested in the native use of the plants in terms of rituals and customs, which is where you find a lot of the psychoactive plant use. So they overlooked the whole field. There were a couple of researchers, like priests, like Father Ladivant, his name was, who wrote one paper specifically on the plants used by the Basotho for religious purposes. And he was saying in that 1932 paper that these plants would most likely or possibly have psychoactive properties. And that was an amazing paper because there were very few papers, and I did a literature review, Scott, of the entire ethnographic anthropological literature, and there was so few. It was like picking up diamonds from a desert. And when I picked up this paper by this Father Ladivant, I realized that there is an incredible plant use happening, but the researchers at the time were not interested. Simple as that. They just weren't bothered.
You've begun to hint at it a little bit earlier, Jean-Francois, but let's go into a more expansive explanation. What really is the difference, if any, between these South African dream plants and other more famous psychedelics? It's almost sounding to me, based on what you're saying, that the dream plant experience is kind of a combination of microdosing using a substance like psilocybin and a full-scale psychedelic experience, let's say, again, going back to ayahuasca or some other substance like that. Is that accurate, or am I missing something?
So, Scott, to answer the question, there are some similarities and differences between the plants used in Southern Africa, especially the Ubulau, and the plants in the Amazon. But come to think of it, if I have to look at the similarities rather, the Ubulau is like dieting with the plant, with the trees. So in South America, they often diet with tree medicines, and isolate themselves in the forest until the spirit of the plant teaches them how to heal. Ubulau is similar to that in that you diet with the plant, you respect the ritual observances of what you're not supposed to eat and your interactions with people, etc. But you could say that the Ubulau plants are like a microdosing of a substance with the end result of knowing more about yourself. So I mentioned that at one point that the plants are like plant teachers. They teach you about yourself. So while you'll be connecting with certain plants and their spirit, from my experience is that the plant teaches you and opens you up to yourself in a way that is similar to a dieta from South America. Some of the traditional healers have said that yes, the plants obviously have a spirit themselves that you connect with, but ultimately, whether it's your own ancestors that are teaching you or the plant spirit that's opening up the information, it's about information about pertaining to yourself, to your life, to your spiritual life. Some of the plants can be very unusual in terms of opening up dream spaces, dreamscapes, which can last a long time, long after you've used the plant. And so you form a connection with the plants in terms of those dreamscapes. But I think the important thing to note is that the Ubulaus give you who you are, but there are certain visionary plants, the psychedelic acting plants like the Buffon disticha, which is very toxic and should only be there are traditional healers who are experts in using the plants. So to find those traditional healers and to navigate the plant with them is very important for your own safety. That plant spirit is a very ancient plant spirit, the buffon, the sand poison bulb, and that can take you into the realm of African ancestry, your own ancestry. You can talk to your ancestors, and so it, from what I understand, it can be a very deep and intense psychedelic experience or psychoactive experience. But it does need to be borne in mind that this plant is not as safe as ayahuasca or any other psychedelic. It has got toxic principles. So you really need to find someone who knows how to use the plant and then have them guide you to use the plant. So on one level, the visionary plants, the psychedelic medicines, can take you into deep areas of, I would imagine, of African ancestry in terms of spirit ancestry. But the Ubulau plants take you more into your own. They show you yourself. They show you your dreams about yourself, about your future. So they work differently. The psychedelic acting plants work a bit differently. They can take you into sometimes transpersonal spaces, will show you dreams where prophetic dreams, which I once had with a syrup made from a bulb of a plant. It showed me a dream about that was going to happen the following year, where I went to London and I met with a friend there. And so it was very prophetic and very interesting. And it happened, yes, absolutely. So this friend that I met in London, he was excited in the dream. He was telling me about his personal growth and journey in London. And when I took the medicine, he was still working in a bank in South Africa. And then a year later, he went to London and he had an epiphany, and he explained to me and he connected to me with great enthusiasm about what he was going through. And then I realized that dream was completely a vision of the future. So there are different levels that plants work. The Ubulaus, like I said, opens intuition and sensitivity to your own self. Some of the psychedelic acting medicines can give you prophetic dreams, can give you visions that are in waking state, visions of where lost objects can be found or stolen property can be found. But my teacher she wasn't a big fan of the psychedelic African medicines. She thought that the Ubulau gives you more consistent information about what you need to know about yourself. That was her.
Wow.
That was her opinion. Yeah.
Wow, I just have to comment. You just sort of slipped by. It can help you find stolen property, things like that. Wow. Okay. So those are dreams I need to experience someday in life, but that's for a whole other conversation. Now, let's get back to questions that are more germane to the topic here. Jean-Francois, you talked a little bit about your personal experiences with these plants, but especially since you've opened the door by telling us a little bit about this familial background, how did your experiences change your life? Were there things that you had to face? Did you come out of this research period not just more knowledgeable, but fundamentally shifted within?
Absolutely, Scott. So what was really interesting, Scott, is over the years, there were times when I asked my teacher whether I was ready to do an plant medicine initiation with her, and there were times that I wasn't ready. But eventually in 2012, my teacher agreed to take me on a journey of initiation using the plant medicines. And what happened is that I went through a process of using a sequence of plant medicines to cleanse your. So what I learned from this experience, and it was a very deep dive, like I mentioned earlier, the Ubulau plants made me face the deepest questions of my life. But it wasn't on its own. So it happened that there were 4 categories of plants that I used. The first category being cleansing medicines, where you steam with medicines to let go of the past, to let go of any cords that you may have with people. And this was a way to prepare yourself for the next step of learning new information. So, and it makes very pragmatic sense. It's like when you want to transform yourself or learn new information and grow and transform yourself, you need to let go of the past. You need to let go of your old self. So the first part of the medicine was steaming with medicines, cleansing with medicines. And then after that, I used Ubulau, a specific Ubulau plant, which I call the mirror Ubulau, which I used for 12 days. Initially, nothing happened. Every morning I used it, and the first thing in the morning, I light my candle, mix the medicines, dilute it with hot water and drink it, and then vomit with it. And then for the first 5-6 days, nothing happened. But around the 6th, 7th day, my intuition and my sensitivity to my environment and started to increase. And after that, it started to really get intense because, like I said, there was this deep question or questions about my life which were in my field of awareness, which didn't want to leave me alone. It was like a mirror. And so I started to get very anxious about it because it was like on me, like a question that was on me. And I explained to my teacher what was happening. And she said to me, "Don't worry, Jean." She used to call me Francois. She said, "Francois, you need to ground. You need to relax as much as you open." And this was a very big takeaway message, which I think is some of the takeaway that insight that the viewers can get, is that we have a lot of people, psychonauts, that are just opening up and flying with the medicine and flying with ayahuasca and the psychedelics, but they might not give enough space or time for relaxing and grounding with other medicines. So my teacher made a very solid point that in African traditional medicine, and in her practice particularly, she believed that as much as you open with the plants, you need to then afterwards ground and relax so that you can root that information into your being. So I learned that there's a whole category of plants that I used a mixture of 2 tree bark medicines, red medicines, that relaxed my system, helped me to settle down, and I used it for about a week. And that was very insightful because it allowed me then to integrate. And there's a lot of talk about integration, psychedelic therapy integration. And I think we can learn from the African traditional healers and the African traditional medicine system that integration requires periods of perturbation or disruption in the system, which the Ubulau affords, but then periods of calm and stability. So what I learned from doing this 4 medicine category, the cleansing, opening, relaxing, and then strengthening is medicines, is that you need stabilization and then destabilization to learn in a process of growth. So you can't only learn by destabilizing and opening up with ayahuasca and destabilizing. Eventually, you can actually damage yourself. Scott, yeah, it's so there's a technology. When I went through that, what was really fascinating on my journey is I went through that process for about 3 to 4 weeks in a little place that I rented next to my teacher. I cleansed with the medicines. I opened up with Ubulau. I felt all those deep, intense questions of self coming up into my psyche. I then stabilized with the red medicines. And then I fortified myself with protection medicines and medicines that would fortify my energy system. I felt very clean. I felt very purified. I felt very connected. And I felt very connected to myself and to the world after that. But what was really, really interesting is that 2-3 months after my initiation with her, with Letty, I read a paper by a multidisciplinary team of from Spain and from Brazil, who looked at the shamanic use of the plants by the curanderos. And what they did was they put them, the researchers put the plant medicines that they used into 4 categories. And these 4 categories were cleansing, intuition and sensitivity, strengthening and protection. And when I read this paper, I was blown away, because I realized what they were detailing was exactly what I had went through with my African traditional healer teacher. So what I've put forward is that there's this cross-cultural technology of using the plants to go through a process of initiation, which is not only just ayahuasca or peyote or San Pedro, but 3 other very important categories of cleansing, relaxing, and strengthening medicines, which are all used in combination in order to facilitate a process of self-transformation.
Did you leave this experience with the issues that you had to face resolved?
Well, the Scott, it's an interesting question, because the questions, and the main question that I was aware of, that was in my field of experience, I'm still grappling today with that question, because it's a life decision. It was a question about a life decision, about being a healer, and taking responsibility as being a healer. And so that question has been pertinent since then till now, as to guiding my life direction, and so it definitely opened up. I can't say it resolved, because like I'm saying, it's like an ongoing question that has relevance and pertinence in my life, where I have to kind of bounce off that question where I'm at and what I'm doing with my life. So yes, it can, they can open up very deep inquiry into self, which can take years to integrate.
Talk to us a little bit about harm reduction. If your research exposes these substances to more and more people, presumably more and more people are going to be curious about them and want to experience them for themselves. How do they not set themselves up for danger or risk, or even falling prey to fraudsters that might pretend to be a qualified medicine person?
Yeah, that is a point of concern, in that people selling the plants online, psychonautical businesses, might get the species wrong. You might not get the Ubulau that you think that you're getting. That's why it was important for me to find a healer, and for people to find a healer that they can trust and that can take them through the process, so that they can learn in a safe way. I mean, once I took a whole stack load of Ubulau, they call them white medicines, Scott, because they are white, as symbolic of the ancestors in African traditional medicine. So, and they literally are white. Some of the roots of Uvuma Mhlope, for example, Synaptolepsis kirki, is white. So all these white medicines are symbolic of the ancestors. And when I once just took all these medicines without an intention of healing, I literally felt my psyche flip upside down. It was the strangest experience. My psyche flipped, and I got very scared, and I went to a fellow shaman healer to rebalance me. And the message I got from that was, you don't use the Ubulaus just for curiosity. It needs to have a healing intention, and it might not apply to everybody, but it certainly applied to me, being a healer or having healing ancestry, that it wasn't good for me just to take them for curiosity. I needed to take them for personal healing.
That's a very powerful takeaway. One final question before we move to the conclusion of this fascinating discussion. When you talk about being more open as you were going through this multi-day period of ingesting these substances and integrating them into your system, were you able to function? So if I am curious about experiencing this for my own healing, would I be able to go to work day to day? Would that be dangerous? Or is it one of those things where I would really need to set aside a couple of weeks, maybe go on a retreat, or at least block away the rest of my life so I could fully function and have the entire experience with the ups and downs that you just described? Or is another methodology altogether optimal for really getting the maximum benefit, particularly from a healing perspective?
To answer that question, I had a patient who worked in a bank in Johannesburg. She was taking the Ubulau and still going to work. She managed herself to deal with the sensitivities and the dreams as, doing the practice in the morning and then still going to work. Yet, however, the dieta structure, if you want to call it, so the dieta in the Amazon, where you go in secluded into a forest and just take the plant medicine and get minimal food and no sugar, no salt, it applies in the African context too. There's the dieta concept applies. So when I did my initiation, I also had ritual observances of minimal contact, no sex, absolutely no particular foods were avoided. So all those factors of the dieta are very relevant to help you maximize the amount of introspection and the amount of learning that you can acquire. So yes, you can take it and go to work and do your normal day-to-day activities, but it can be a little bit jarring for you, because you're upping your level of antenna of connection. So if you're in a stressful environment, it could get more stressful potentially. That's why it would be recommended to take a week where you just on your own, quiet with the plants and taking the plant medicines. Yeah, so it is preferable to be secluded. But I go into that into my book, like what are the things that people can do and should do during those, during the dieta, the African dieta. And so, to explain how it's best optimized.
Very, very interesting. And I'm glad you're sharing that before anyone dives too deeply or quickly into anything that may need some deeper consideration, particularly as to how to plan your life around it. What can be taken away from your study of these plants that can be used elsewhere, and that any just random person who's listening to or watching this episode can integrate into their lives?
Well, Scott, the takeaway for me is that Africa, to me, is the cradle of psychoactive plants. Everybody is focusing on the Amazon and ayahuasca, but I feel that there is so much we can learn from traditional healers from Africa on the use of psychedelic medicine and other psychoactive plants in terms of understanding how to heal mental illness. I think that I didn't even do that much research on that subject, but there's growing interest from abroad into my book and into my research, where there is a component that we need to understand what is the indigenous understandings of treating mental illness using African psychoactive plants and psychedelic medicines. And I have a feeling that there's so much knowledge there that's still there from old traditional healers, from the old generation, that we need to capture that information. We need to document it. We need to then apply it in modern psychotherapy, psychiatry, and of course, plant-assisted therapy, which will become the future, I believe, of medicine. So I think that there's so much knowledge from the traditional healers of understanding what is mental illness, how to treat it with plants, but all of that knowledge still needs to be recorded. Up till today, it hasn't been recorded.
And it sounds like, as you're indicating, there is a lot to share.
Yes.
If there is a single takeaway from this that I would like to leave the audience with, it is that the exploration of these plants might seem like it is exploding, but nonetheless, there remain significant entire categories of substances that may be able to bring us benefit and provide experiences that are rich, meaningful, and deep in a whole variety of ways that are somewhat similar, but maybe not similar at all to those that we're more familiar with. And that understanding, exploring all of these can bring benefits, at least potentially, to even more and more people. We've focused today principally on South Africa, but Africa is a big continent. Who knows what else is out there that has been used, that has been ignored by traditional researchers, that could be helping folks. Jean-Francois, if there's a final takeaway that you'd like to share with the audience, what is that? And then we're going to find out more about where people can learn more about you.
Well, thanks, Scott. I mean, on the top of my head, off the top of my head, I would say psychoactive plants have been used across different cultures in a very sophisticated technology, as a sophisticated technology to help people transform either mental illness, periods of mental illness, or self-growth and development, which we need to look at all the cultures using plants and take the commonalities of those, of how they're used, to basically understand into the future how psychedelic medicines, all the gems of knowledge that our forefathers and shamans and traditional healers learnt along the way, and use those and include those and integrate those into the therapy, what will be the modern plant-assisted psychotherapy. So I think there's a cross-cultural technology of using these plants for self-development, which needs to be understood in its entirety, so that we can understand how the shamans and the traditional healers use those plants to help people to heal their minds and develop strengths and powers within a person. And I think that's very possible if we do the research properly.
Really, really important point. Thank you very much.
Thank
Jean-Francois, tell us a little bit more about your book, and also share with us how can people follow you or get more closely within your online orbit.
Thanks, Scott. So all that we've been discussing is my book is basically a journey of doing that research from 1999 to about around 2015 or so. What happened was, as I was doing the research, I published papers on, the first one being an inventory of all the plants from Southern Africa, which was an amazing thing to do, where I found 306 species of plants being used in Africa, in Southern Africa, for psychoactive purposes. So that's included in the book. But as I went along and I did the papers, it was like I went from a big picture question to smaller aspects of focus of what is Ubulau, what are plants used for divination in Africa, and do they have psychoactive properties, which I showed convincingly that 50% of the plants have other psychoactive uses. To the prejudice against traditional medicine and academia, I wrote a chapter on that, which is a very fascinating chapter for me, and I think for people who are interested in that. And then even into a chapter of plants that can be used for self-exploration in terms of focus, memory, etc. So my book is basically my papers put into a compilation, but then also with a narrative of the chapter introductions are a narrative of the journey, doing the research, the ups and downs, the disappointments, the joys. And so the book is the story of my research journey. It's African Psychoactive Plants, Journeys in Phytoalchemy. Phytoalchemy is the name I gave to my practice and to who I was doing that research. Phyto means plants in Greek, so plant alchemy. So that book, African Psychoactive Plants, Journeys in Phytoalchemy, is available on Amazon in all major countries, so people can obtain it from there. And I also have a website where I have videos, online video course on ethnobotany. So people who want to learn about the relationship of between people and plants, they can look at my website, which is Phytoalchemy, PHYTO, alchemy.co.za. And they can take the online course, which is a video-based course. So they can also learn from me from my online courses. And yeah, that's the way people can connect with me. And of course, they can email me, and I do one-on-one mentoring. So I've often mentored people who want to go the dream plant route, or they want to use plant medicines to explore themselves, and I guide them on how to do this process and which plants to take, etc.
For those of you who are listening to or watching the Webdelics podcast, make no mistake, we have many more episodes like the one you just listened to or heard, really focusing on specific substances, what they mean, what they are, what their dangers are, and how they can help you out. We are committed to continually providing vetted, credible, accurate, and human-centric information about all types of psychedelics and psychoactive plant medicines. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and tell every single person that you know about what we're doing so we can get the word out and maybe help those folks or people that they know as well. And then be sure to stop by our website at webdelics.com. That's WEBDELICS.com to read more about psychedelics and plant medicines. Also, feel free to sign up for our blog. It has excellent information, in-depth, credible articles by subject matter experts that are well worth reading. Finally, once you've done all that, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite audio platform or on YouTube. Come back next time and enjoy another episode of the Webdelics podcast.